Granted, today's presentation, or the talk that I'm going to give now, isn't specifically about sex, but sex is definitely a key part of it. Now, I also don't have any slides for this presentation because I'm pretty much going to be storytelling, but I did give her my information slide, which she said is pretty, so it's going to hang out there, which I will describe what all of those things mean just after I'm done. But as I'm going to go ahead and get started, I want to ask you guys for permission. I'd like to ask you for permission because at this point, you know, when I was going to put this talk together, I originally had the topic and then gave the few sentences, and I'm like, okay, well then I'll put the presentation together later. And then I realized that as I was putting it together and I was thinking about the slides, I was like, this is going to be kind of boring if I just give you facts, if I just tell you how we got to today as far as relationships and modern relationships go. So I started thinking that maybe I would tell a story instead. So I'm going to tell mine, if it's okay with you. Do I have your permission to tell a story instead? Yes? From everyone? Good. First lesson in consent. There you go. That is the consensual part of consensual non-monogamy, I suppose. And the next thing that I want to mention is that if you have a question about your own personal life, I'm not going to give you any answers to it. I'm not going to give you, I really can't answer any of your questions or give you any solutions, but what I am about is ideas. And people up to this point think that I know a lot about sex and sexuality, and chances are I do know most. I know more than most, but I have to say that the majority of what I do is just question you, the box that you've put yourself in, maybe even a box that you didn't realize that you had been placed in, and maybe one that is harboring a lot of other areas in your life. Just so happens that I called to Uri, one of the co-founders of the Institute. I said, I've just recently been giggling over the fact that I called myself like a modern millennial female sexual Socrates. It's like, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to ask you lots of questions so that you get to the answer yourself, so that you can find out what's true for you. So now that I have your permission, the story that I want to tell you is about how I even got to this point to begin with, and how I'm going to talk about consensual non-monogamy is, so I found myself in the laundry room of my family home in New Orleans in Louisiana. And I was in the laundry room, and I was crouched down on the ground, and my back was up against the wall, and I was sobbing like as hard as I possibly could. And this was the onset of my last, hopefully ever, panic attack that I will ever experience. And the reason why I was sobbing was because I kept telling myself, like, how the fuck did you get into this position, Alexa? How did you do this? How could you let all of these things go so crazy? How did you let your relationship and your life just slip through your fingers like this? Why? There must be more. There must be something different. Like, what did you do? And at that point, I stopped with all of this egoic nonsense that was going on in my head, and I said, stop right now. Do not do this to yourself. This will be the last time that you cry this hard. This will be the last time that you find yourself in this position. You will make a change. Only at that time, I didn't know what the change was going to be. So I kind of dusted myself off, and I picked myself up, and then I decided I'm going to change the game, because I just found myself losing my relationship that I had been in for over 4 years to the person that I had been engaged to for over 3 of those years. And it was literally laden to the brink. It couldn't be filled with more guilt and shame, infidelity, disloyalty, and it was disgusting. And it was the second time around that I had done the same cycle, where I was like, there must be something different. And I literally felt like I was losing my identity. Not only did I lose a lot of money in the process, but I lost who I was and had to figure out how to put all of that back together. So fast forward a year from there. And at this point, I should mention, the job that I had was a cruise ship crew member. I did that for 6 years. I was a manager of a revenue department on a cruise ship. And so that's what I'd been doing for 6 years at the time. So anyway, I find myself on a ship, and at this point, I lost a bunch of weight. That was how I basically threw myself into personal development. I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get my shit together, and I'm gonna figure out a new way to live life. And at that time, I wasn't ready for relationships, so I just did this whole typical cliche chick thing where I'm like, I'm living life for me. You know, it's no big deal. I'm not really into the relationship thing. And I told myself, no more to men, no more to women at that time too. I was like, no more to that. I'm just gonna focus on myself. Lost about 35 pounds. Was heavily into personal development, and I felt really good about myself. Figured out, you know, it was the first time I was like, what's my favorite food and my favorite color, my favorite music to listen to, and then it wasn't attached to another person. So I was like really finding myself, so to speak. And so I remember I was sitting in one of the auditoriums on a ship, a new ship, one of the largest cruise ships in the world, actually. And so I'm waiting for a normal, like, mandatory training, another mandatory training that you have to do whenever you live on a ship. And I remember that there was this gentleman that entered the room, and I was facing the front, and I was waiting for whatever this training thing was gonna be. And I remember feeling him before I recognized or knew that it was a person, and I just felt his presence. And I remember turning around going, what's going on? And I turned around, and there he was. And I call it being hit with like an alpha swag. It was like just washed over me, like one of those things where I'm like, okay, take me now. And so like, you know, you go back to cave woman, like just throw me over your shoulder, I'm yours. And I remember like, whoa. And then it was the first time since that year that I had to have this check of, oh my gosh, there's a person who could make me feel something again, faulty, and I don't even know who this person is, could make me feel fragile when I've been working on that whole year to be strong again. And so anyway, he was the cruise director, and he went, we did the training and everything, and he could feel my response. Now, that presence and that response happens to be a lot about the other talk that I'm doing, which has to do with sexual deviancy. So that's going to be on Sunday. But anyway, back to my story. So anyway, him and I start to go on dates on the ship. We start to kind of see each other. And for the longest time, like, he wouldn't touch me. He wouldn't hug me or anything. And then we were hanging out all this whole time. And then I got to a point where I was like, look at me. Why aren't you touching me? Why aren't you making any moves? Are you wasting your time? What's going on? And I remember after about half a bottle of wine, then I got the courage to ask. And I said, so basically, what's the deal? What is your deal? And he said to me, and we'd had some conversations about relationships in general. Up to that point, we both had talked about, you know, not really wanting to be in a committed relationship or anything like that. But this is what he hit me with at that time when I asked him, why aren't you touching me? Why aren't you making a move? And he said, you have 3 choices, basically. Here are the 3 choices. We can sleep together tonight. We can have, you know, this relationship where there's no commitment. You understand that I am not, by nature, I do not agree with monogamy, and I don't live monogamously. And you can be okay with that. And we can continue sleeping together, and you just understand. The second option is we sleep together only tonight, and we never sleep together ever again. That's it. Done. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, done. Third option is that you say that you're okay with the fact that I don't commit and that I don't live monogamously, and you say that you're okay, and we sleep together, we start sleeping together, then you try to change me, you try to get me to commit, you try to get me to only be with you, and then guess what happens? I say no, you wind up hurt. And I thought, holy shit, I was so turned on by his honesty. I was like, really? Okay, well then I had to check myself for that moment there. I was like, which one am I gonna choose? I don't know which one am I gonna choose, right? If I'm gonna protect myself, I'm gonna choose option number 2. I'm gonna, you know, get my big O and then be on my way. But that wasn't what I was about. And he could see on my face, like, I was really conflicted with this whole story. And so he told me at the time, go, come back. I can tell you need some affection, some attention. So what I decided was option number 1. Do you want to know which one played out? Option number 3. Option number 3, and he told me. However, it was ever so slightly that I tried to make those kind of try to manipulate with my words, trying to get you to commit to only me, even though I know that you're probably seeing 2 or 3 other people. And I would even casually ask, like, so I'm just curious, like, it's totally okay with me, but how many other people are you seeing on board? And he's like, don't ask me questions that you won't like the answers to. I was like, okay, noted. So anyway, this relationship of sorts was very pivotal for me, because at one stage, whenever I did try to change him and then I wound up getting hurt, he had recommended a book in one of our previous conversations. It was called Sex at Dawn. Has anybody read Sex at Dawn? Modern relationships, why we stray, how we mate, you know, what that means for modern relationships. And he said, he kept talking about that book and that was something that really solidified his choices. And so whenever I wound up hurt, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do the research, because I don't want a commitment either. Why am I trying to make him when I've already said I don't want that? So I read the book. And in that book, it was one of those like, holy shit, what do I do now? Because this just challenged everything, my entire foundation, my understanding of how relationships are built and what do they mean. When I read that book, literally everything changed for me. I'd never experienced, I mean, I've read a lot of books since then, but this is one that really made the difference, because it made me question all that I'd been taught. And up to this point, I'd also identified with being Catholic. So I'd already gone through all the motions, kind of confirmation, baptism, I was eating the cracker, drinking the wine, all that story, right? And so when I read this book and it challenged everything that had to do with relationships and sexuality, I was so confused. It was the first time that I said, I don't agree with monogamy either. That's a fucked up system. However, people can do it if it works for them. But is that their default? It made me question everything. And then it was at the same time, coincidentally, that me starting to understand sexuality and relationships that I said, screw this Catholic thing too. I'm not doing that anymore either, because at that time, I thought, I was already confused, because as far as my Catholic faith told me, I had to live that quote-unquote American dream where I couldn't have any sex until I was married anyway, and then that marriage was supposed to last until the end of time, right, till death do you part, and you're supposed to follow all of these steps. It only supported these particular steps and these particular life goals, and no other option was laid out, and I was already failing at that miserably. So it was the first time that I had all those things come out of my mouth, and I was scared, and I was shaking, and I remember I was crying, but I was also smiling the first time I said a lot of these things. And after that, the book in particular, Sex at Dawn, taught me, I guess I should give you some examples. Now, it's one of my recommendations. It's the book that I recommend the most to people that work with me and follow me. I'm like, just read that and then see how you feel. Because it taught me things like the fact that we're built for variety. We're built for variety, and we're built to have sex. And so the thing that winds up happening, that more often than not, relationships end because of what? Infidelity. So it could end for a lot of other reasons, but that happens to be something that is definitely on a lot of people's minds. Like, is my partner cheating on me? That whole word of cheating. But if you understand biologically what drives us, then it allows for you to look at that with completely different eyes. So reading the book and understanding, right? So women, right? We're built, a lot of people think that we're built to just have one partner. We're more inclined for monogamy. However, but when you look at the way that our body responds, especially when it comes to sexual arousal, that's not the case. It's not the case at all. Has anybody ever heard a heterosexual couple have sex ever before? Have you ever watched porn or like heard somebody in the next room? Have you ever heard them having sex before? Ever? People having sex? Yes, probably more than you that are willing to admit. Okay, have you ever heard an instance where the man is making more noise than the woman? Like nobody there. Okay, so like 1 or 2 times, right? Okay, the reason is because female copulatory vocalization, we are shouting out so that when you're done pumping and you go into your refractory period where you snooze, and I'm like, hey boys, I'm ready for the next one, right? I'm calling the other ones. Now that's like thinking all the way back, right? So the thing is, we are literally, just that one little thing lets you know, like, what's up with that? We're fighting against this, we're fighting against the way our body operates, and the fact that men, right? If we look at, just an example, if we look at our closest primate relatives, which we are primates, we have our closest primate relatives are the bonobo and the chimpanzee. We're equidistant DNA away from them. And then like far down the line, we've got like the gorilla and the gibbon, right? So if we just look at those primates, the gorilla and the gibbon might have sex throughout their lifetime 12 to 15 times. But on the other side, us, the chimps and the bonobos, it's over 1,000 times in our lifetime. We're literally built to have sex. That's what we do. And the fact that we try to only do it with one person, it's tricky. If we think committed relationship until death do us part, it's tricky. And I'm sure that I'd find the majority of people, even in monogamous relationships, will say it is still tricky. It is a conscious decision that you have to make. And we don't understand, we're not told whenever we're thinking that we're gonna follow all of the rules, that this conscious decision is really freaking hard to a bunch of people who are not woke, right? So, So I thought at this time in my life, after I'd read Sex at Dawn, I was going through all of this what the hell moments. I thought, well, if I'm not gonna do it this way and I'm gonna challenge everything, first and foremost, I went back in my history, in my memory of all the times I'd ever felt cheated or guilty or jealous or any of those things, and I questioned the way that I felt in my mind back then, so I changed the way that I felt. If I no longer believe this now, then why do I still have to hurt for it from the past? So it was an interesting thing that happened to me. It was wonderful as far as my personal development goes, but at the same time, I was like, if I'm not gonna believe in this anymore, but this has occupied so much of who I am in my life and everything. So if I don't believe this anymore, what am I going to replace it with? I don't know what my options are, and I certainly have no one as a role model to show me what the other options are. So I Googled. I went to Google to help me. I was like, what am I going to do? That's like going to Google and saying, you know, at 17 and you're about to go to college and you're like, what should I do with my life? And you Google like, what should I do with my life? It's kind of like what to do if I don't choose monogamy. But like so I Googled what to read after Sex at Dawn. Has anybody ever read The Ethical Slut? Okay, more people, well, probably the same people that read Sex at Dawn, because maybe you Googled it too. You're like, what do I read? Like, what the hell do I do now? So The Ethical Slut, and that opened the door, so to speak, because I was like, I know I don't like this, and I know that this isn't working, this box is not working, that society handed down to me, that tradition handed down to me, that my faith handed down to me. So if this isn't working, then what are my options? It was the first time that I was like, okay, what's polyamory? It doesn't really make much sense. It's like Greek and Latin mixed together, but I'll roll with it. Okay, so many loves. All right, so do I want to live like that? Well, what are the other options? So then it literally laid out as many, because in reality, there's more than we could ever define. Relationship styles, basically relationships by your design. Now that to me sounds like a whole lot of freedom to choose. I say this all the time, that the way that I am now and the way that I live now, it by no means is any easier than when I was trying to live monogamously, but it does feel more natural. So it's easier to deal with the issues that come up while I'm living non-monogamously. And so I read The Ethical Slut, and it told me all of these different terms, and I'll just throw some of them out at you. Polyamory meaning many loves. I know several people who are in polyamorous, even tribes, because there's lots of different types of poly. I have a family that I'm very close to that they are starting a big old tribe. You can tell I'm from the South when I say big old, right? A big old tribe in, I think it's Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken, and their whole means of relationship is continuing to get more people into the relationship. They have children in this situation, and that is the way that it works for them. Granted, it takes a lot of communication. Imagine, if you can't communicate with one person monogamously, just add 4 more people to the mix. It requires so much more or a higher level of communication skill than I would say maybe even a monogamous relationship would require. I happen to personally, I'll give you my personal way that I like to live now, is it's referred to oftentimes as sologamy, which sounds kind of like salami, which doesn't sound attractive. But I consider myself to be an island. I like to move around a lot. Remember Uri was talking about taxes in the presentation 2 presentations ago, and he said, oh, the people who move around a lot can avoid taxes. I was like, that's me. I never am still. And so I like my relationships. It doesn't mean that I don't crave attention or crave affection or crave a long-term relationship. It's just that they're in another location. So I go to them whenever it's convenient for me. Yes, I get to be selfish in this sense because I've set that standard. And that's a part of the agreement. So I will go into these different locations and I will have experiences with each of these people, and they all know about each other. That's the consensual part. But it's up to each one of them how much more they want to know about the others. That's what I grant to them. So there's lots of different ways, right? Sologamy, you have polygamy, which is if you're going to be married, then you'll say polygamy is like many wives, polyandry, many husbands. And it's kind of sad though, even as I wasn't planning on saying this, but there's only about 4% of, I think not 4%, 4 specific cultures in the world today that practice where the women have many men versus the men having many women, which I find kind of interesting. So my personal relationship structure, I'm like going against the grain, I'm like going with those 4, if I can, if I could. Now, the reason why I tell you all of these things isn't because I want to say that monogamy is bullshit. I mean, the current way that we think of marriage and monogamy, it's like marriage, monogamy, love, sex, all of those things have to all be together, and that is relatively nouveau. It's only the last couple hundred years that we've been operating that way. If we think about us as a whole, anatomically speaking, humans have been around for 200,000 years, and for the last 10,000 have we been operating the way that we operate now as far as coupling. That's a very small amount of time in the whole grand scheme, right? So So if we understand those things, then we can essentially try to make ourselves happier. We can essentially try to build in more freedom, which I think maybe might be the reason why I'm having this conversation with you to begin with, is because this is about trying to put more freedom into your relationship structure. Even the word structure sounds kind of icky, but I'm not bashing monogamy as a whole, right? If that's your conscious decision, then understand that's your conscious decision and understand the woes that might come with that, and understand, at least biologically speaking and historically speaking, how we've gotten to where we are today, so you can work with that in your favor. I'm not saying this, right, like I say, this is a funny part too. My sister is 13 years older than me. She's been married to my brother-in-law since forever, it feels like, for over 20 years. They're coming up to their 20-year anniversary. And my mom has been married 5 times. So I had to see both of those things. It's like, this is obviously broken, but I've also had many conversations with my sister where she says, I'm on my long walk to 30 right now this year. She says, you're 30. She's like, don't do it. Don't do the kid thing, don't do the marriage thing. But she's having like my nieces and my brother-in-law, who have been in my life since I was, well, not my nieces, but my brother-in-law's been in my life since I was 3. So it's like, how are you saying that? She's like, just don't do it. Just keep doing whatever you want, right? You're always gonna see the grass is greener on the other side, so to speak. But so again, not my mission or my message is to poke at monogamy. I'm saying that there are other ways. So if you find yourself in your relationship and you're thinking it's tough, if you're thinking it's kind of a struggle in some areas as far as fidelity goes, redefine it for yourself. If you really did question who you are to the core and you acknowledged your desires and you acknowledged how you really feel and you looked at the box for what it is regarding relationships and sex, if you could tear that apart and piece it back together the way that you want it to be, what does it look like if you do the choosing? And if you're in a relationship long-term with someone that you love very dearly, doesn't mean that just because you want to have sex with somebody else that you love them less. But talk about it. What does it look like? What if you were going to open that relationship? What does that mean? In what ways can that bring you closer together if you were going to open or unfence or something like that? And to have the conversation, I always encourage couples to have the conversation, and even singles, and you're thinking that you're going to be in a relationship at some point. What is the conversation that you'll have with the understanding that we have these tendencies? So we have tendencies to stray in relationship and have a propensity, or not propensity, we have the tendency to stray and want outside of. How do we talk about that in a healthy way? And how can we use that in our favor to make sure that all of our needs are met? So I would say, for me personally, I wound up trading things like fear, jealousy, guilt, angst, a lack of desire, all of those things. I traded those things to redefine my relationship structure, my sex life on my terms. I traded it for bliss, joy, compersion, excitement. I made it to where it worked for me instead of me trying to fit and work for it. And so I hope that just having this conversation with you today at least inspires you to have more of that conversation. Thank you. How did I do for time? I actually don't know how I did for time.
Horo? Yeah. So now it's the time for questions. I think Alexa Martinez knows good sex and isn't afraid to ask, neither respond. So if they are...
You can ask me all the sex. All the sex, yes. This one? Sure. Thank you.
Hello. So I had a chance to talk to you a little bit beforehand, and we talked a little bit about polyamory, etc. And my experience is that a lot of polyamorists, they do this thing of, oh, monogamy is prescribed in society, but we're not built for it because biology, evolution. And so the example you gave is the orgasm, the female orgasm, and we're vocal during sex, etc. Therefore, women are receptive to multiple partners and blah, 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 blah. So my fear is when we take evolution and biological truths, we still can twist them to a narrative that we prefer. And I think those books do that, and as well as Catholicism does it as well. So, okay, for example, you have your interpretation of why women are vocal during sex, and I would say men, when they have orgasm, they ejaculate and it's visible and you know that it happened. Women orgasm internally. And when so men don't know if they orgasm unless they're vocal. Now, why should
you know it?
You're right, but why? Now, when you orgasm, your wall contracts and actually sucks sperm in, so you want your mate to know that you're orgasmed so that you know that the babies might be made.
Right.
So that would be my explanation.
Right.
And I can't prove that that's the right interpretation, and you can't prove that yours is.
Right.
So do you think there's a better way to talk about these kinds of things without using this biological basis of we were made to be like this because?
Sure. And my answer is right, and I say my answer, my idea is chase your pleasure, but with a set of ethics and morality, whatever that is personally to you. Like, you know, there's always going to be someone who's going to say, but. So what feels right to you then? If that answers your question, I'm not sure if that answers your question, because it's like if you're describing, they're either or. I mean, for me personally, I'm going to go with what I choose, right? So I have my certain standard. And again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna chase what feels good and what feels right. You know what I mean? Because even if I go into, you know, tenting, which is what happens in the vagina to suck the sperm up and all of those things, I immediately think of a tribe, I can't remember if it's in Africa or if it's in South America, where the women believe they had no outside influence, basically from the outside, where they're relatively untouched, where it's like where they literally believe that having more sex, right, if I want to have a well-rounded child, then I want to have sex with all of the people that have the great traits. If I want a well-rounded child that's funny and strong and all those things, then I'm going to have sex with all of those people, and accumulation of sperm is what's going to build that child, right, which is also in the book, and I've heard it several times over in other talks, but to know that that's what they think is fascinating to me. And I mean, I get it, I get both sides of the story or the spectrum or whatever you want to call it, but that's why I also say I'm not trying to knock monogamy. If you want that, then do that. I
appreciated you said that. I thought
yeah,
it was
then
really
freaking do that, right? I love my brother-in-law and my sister. They've been together for, it feels like forever, and I laugh when they fight, and I am there when my sister wants to talk to me about it, but that's their conscious decision. They chose that, and they love each other for that choice, and they're continuing their, you know, their life story. When I go in the room, I like the spectacle now. At first they were like, why is my little, like, my sister, why is my little sister talking about sex now? It was like, it was so hard for my family to see me start to talk about this and to basically come out with, I'm not like you guys. And now I'm the one where they say, oh, hey, my little sister, she talks about non-monogamy. Here, go. I'm like the party trick. Here, go. So just start the conversation. That's really what I want to do, is as long as you're doing it, literally doing it, and it's the way that you want to do it, fucking right on.
I'm curious about these tribes you talked about where you have like many husbands. Mm-hmm. Which one was that?
I can't remember. Chat to me after, because
India. There's an Indian one, and
Indian?
it's religious based because the women actually inherit all the. It's like about a land inheritance, so it's better for them to marry brothers. They marry. It's like so they don't have to. I don't know the specifics,
Perfect.
but it is in India.
Yeah. Okay.
And my second question would be, like, how would you then do like raising children? Because if you have polyamory or if you have multiple changing partners, that might not be a very stable thing for the child to grow up with. I mean, I can understand like the difference between like how people like they are infidel, but then they lie about it. But so that I think being honest about it is definitely an improvement.
Right.
But that doesn't make it always easier for sure.
Right.
And I heard about some tribes where the raising of the child is not done by the husband and the dad, but I think it actually is in that tribe where you talked about the children where they believe that they have to sleep with a funny guy, with a tall guy, and so on to get a mix of all that. I think since now you don't know who is the dad,
everybody takes responsibility.
It's the responsibility of the woman and her brothers. So
women, brother, mothers, family,
exactly.
the whole tribe as a more or less egalitarian. So they're sharing literally everything, all of the duties, all of the food, all of the responsibilities, all of the shelter, all of the everything.
So I just think that is not practical in our society, but what is your answer to that child raising thing?
So I don't have any children. That's not a part of my journey. I don't think that that's something that I am going to consider. However, I do work with people who have children who are in these polyamorous relationships, and that is always a topic that comes up. It's always a topic that I can't speak from personal experience. I can just go off of what I've seen and what I've heard. If I could use an example, they're a triplet, so to speak, but they also, so I have a husband and a wife. They divorced. The husband now has 2 girlfriends that are primary partners that live on basically live on this land that has 2 big houses on it. And then the wife, the ex-wife, has a boyfriend. They all have kids. And they all have exes that have to share. But the communication with which that is required, these are some of the highest functioning children I've ever experienced. It's wild. It doesn't look that way to them. If you're always, not that you're always honest, but you're always real with the kids at what's going on, we don't give them enough credit. You know what I mean? And the fact that a tribe used to raise children. It's not that way anymore. Kids are possessions. Don't you dare tell my kid how to be, do or whatever. I'm going to do that. I'm taking care of that. But how well-rounded is that child? So I'm not saying that either one is better or worse, because you can fuck up them both. You know what I mean? I have lots of friends that, traditional standard narrative hasn't really worked either. So.
Yeah, one last, maybe.
There's 2.
Just quick, what age were your parents divorced?
So I was 3. I was 3. You'll have to tell me the relevance of that one.
There is a theory about raising children that it's not very safe. It's dangerous for a kid to have only one woman as a a pattern, and one man, because then they idealistic them, and they don't see any other versions of men or women, or then for their potential partners in the future, it's better if they have more adults.
Exposure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Okay, I was about to say something about the biology things, but you said it. About the woman vocalizing more in the pleasure and the man not. In my experience, is more a cultural thing, because I interacted with many different males and with many different culture, and in my experience is that heterosexual males, so that there is a big correlation on the stereotype, the box they fill. They doesn't do noises, and other kind of males, yes, do.
Okay.
So it's I believe using the biology arguments is a really slippery slope. And rope, and we should not. But we also many times the biology has been interpreted in a sexist way.
What's your question? What's your question?
Huh?
What's your question?
Okay.
Do you have one?
No, I
thought so. That's okay. Understandable, right? People are going to think either way. So what do you decide then? Other than do what's right for you, right? Do what's right for you. Because the base of this is relationships. So I didn't go that much into sex. Granted, sex is what a lot of times ends relationships. You think a lot of times, right, from where I am from, the deep south in Louisiana, you got to know that boy before you decide that he's gonna, put the ring on it. But if we're not sexually compatible and we get married and then we have a terrible sex life, guess what? That thing that we were told doesn't mean anything really, should be on the back burner, should be secondary, could sure as shit wind up ending that relationship. So, question, he has a mic.
I want to ask you, I don't know, I found out that people want deeper relationships. Some want, some don't. But there's a great deal of people that want deeper relationships
Right.
and a fusion. And usually in a monogamous relationship, you have I think, now this is where I'm asking you.
Sure.
I think you have a better shot of more fusion.
Deeper connection.
A deeper connection, and sexual, and values, and culturally, and you grow together, and you, I don't know, there are amazing things there. And of course, the breakup is very, very hard.
Intense,
when
yeah.
it has. And of course, I mean, it's not working. It's very hard to break up, although you're miserable. And there are drawbacks. Mm-hmm. But have you found out, I don't know, when you have polyamorous relationships, so you are with that guy and that guy, and then you kind of don't have time for the guys you've been because now you are in another time zone and meeting other guys. How does that impact the shallowness or depth of your relationships?
Yes.
How satisfied are you from this
For
point
sure.
of view?
That's a good question, and that's a whole nother presentation and a workshop. It is. It really is, because those are the things that you have to look into. If you're going to decide, I'm going to live life a little bit differently, I'm going to explore what polyamory is, or is a non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy or whatever, you have to look at those things. And I literally was on a call right before this where I was doing a live stream that we were talking, myself and another lady who is a BDSM life coach. She lives a wildly polyamorous lifestyle, but she refuses casual sex. And it's wild to hear that from someone, but she's deeply connected to her two primary partners. She's deeply connected. They live with her. And my challenge is, why limit your ability to love? Why tell yourself that you can only do it the right way, the real way, with one other person? That's going deeply into what pair bonding is. And judging by the response so far, we won't go into what we think of as, you know, as what's right and how I would describe pair bonding and where it comes from. But personally, I like to love someone for exactly who they are, how they show up, and the way that's the most authentic to them. And if there's something that they are not providing to me, whether that be sexually or otherwise, intellectually, then I would like to be able to have the freedom to love just as deeply, just as hard, someone who does provide those things. So I am a testament to the fact that that is, I was gonna say bullshit, but that was not right. that it's up to you. It's up to you. You can still have that deep, meaningful connection with more than one person. It is up to you. You don't have to limit your ability to love. And what I think is so remarkable is that when you show yourself that you don't have to, your love grows by 10 or more. It's pretty incredible, our ability to love. Now, as far as the shallowness of the relationship and like I don't have enough time, that was another topic that came up today when I was talking earlier. That was with the other lady. She's like, I have to schedule. And you mentioned how to balance time with multiple partners. That was something that you saw on my blog at thevioletbutterfly.com. Like I have writers from a lot of different places. The writer of that particular article talks about it. She's got to have a calendar with all of her people so that they know who's who in the zoo and where they're going and how they're doing it. But again, it's up to you. If you want that many lovers or you want that many partners, that it takes that much time, well, then you put in the work in order to make sure that everyone's needs gets met. You're talking a lot. You're talking a lot to your partners. You're communicating a lot, which is interesting because you don't spend that much time with them, but you talk very deeply, very present if you do it this particular fashion, because like people can screw up polyamory or open relationships, and they can screw up monogamy just as much. But it's what I find so interesting is that a lot of times when I work with couples that are trying to just get out of a funk, they're just having a hard time saying anything to each other. Like on the other side, when you have multiple people, you have to exercise that. Otherwise, you don't get anywhere. So I hope that answers that a little bit. Yes, yes, deep connection, yes. Do we have time? I saw your hand go up. Oh, okay.
Okay. I have one quick question.
You're here.
So you were talking about monogamy and polyamory, and I think it would be useful if you could tell about various kinds of internal structure of polyamory, because it's
yes, okay.
like different types, so people kind of see the menu of possibilities. It's just not choosing one or the other, but then you can have another option.
Sure. So that's a little bit like what's a primary partner, secondary partner. I didn't even see over there, primary and secondary. So if you have a primary partner, that's the person that you might spend the most time with. Maybe you're even married to that person. And you're, not to give it a hierarchy, like one's better than the other or worth more than the other, but you might have other partners off of that. So say, for an example, myself and my primary partner, my husband or whoever, say, for an example, I have a girlfriend and he has a girlfriend. and we're all in individual relationships, it's a W, basically. Or it's like a, is it a W? One more person will make it a W. So our relationships, there's lots of different structures. So I have a relationship with another female, doesn't have a relationship with him. He has a relationship with another female, I don't have a relationship with her, but we have our primary relationship. So you have two secondaries that stem off of that. For me, something that I remember when I was journaling, like how does my particular structure, how do I think I would like it? So it would be a triangle. So me as a partner with another man, where we have a girlfriend or we have someone that we date. That way I in my whole grand scheme, I thought I'm gonna have this person who I can rely on to be comforting and to understand my emotions and understand my cycle and understand my moods and go shopping with me. And I don't have to ask him to do that or understand that, but just be there and be him, right? But he also gets to date her. So if I'm not feeling very sexy, he's got someone to have sex with. But if I'm interested in some kind of other relationship, or some kind of sexual experience, maybe with just her, so we all wind up being our own individual relationships and then as a whole. So it'd be like a V, triad, so to speak. I think that gives kind of an idea. Is there another one? Triad, so you have a V where there's that's what it is, not a W, where your relationship, they stem and they don't interact with each other. So if you have the primary couple as the middle here, this is interesting, that the primary couple is in the middle and you have your two relationships outside of that. This is great. It's gonna get even better when you guys it's a little bit, I will say this. So the next talk that I'm doing, that's about full spectrum sexuality and sexual deviancy. That one's the one that really gets saucy, I have to say, right? This is all relative. Your relationships are relative. So, like when it comes to sexual deviancy, that's a whole nother subject.
Here. Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So I've been exploring polyamory for a while, and I often have this challenge. For example, I met a girl recently, and we talked about polyamory. This is the way I like to explore relationships and kind of designing the relationship and stuff like that. And she's very curious about it, very curious about the freedom, and in a rational way. But I know that the moment I don't know, in a couple of months or a year or something, I will tell her, oh, look, I met this other girl and I'd like to explore, go on a date or something.
Yeah.
I feel that she will suffer.
Yes.
And I have a challenge now, like what.
She's like, she's like that.
Like I'm not sure where to.
You're paying attention.
I'm not sure where to draw the line. Should I say, okay, I feel that this is not working for you, let's stop now, or just present the choices and let her choose? Like, I don't know. What?
Now everybody's going to go back to their partner and be like, you have three choices. You have three choices. No, I mean, it's a part of that communication, right? So you enjoy polyamory, or that's something that resonates with you, but you find yourself in a technically monogamous relationship, right? So what do you do from there? How do you make her feel comfortable? But I would say you remain steadfast in your decision, because every time you allow for her to call you hers, you're narrowing that, I'll call it the wiggle room. You're starting to make it harder for you to wiggle out of that. And she is not manipulating, but that's the way that situation plays out a little bit, where it gets really hard. But you have to have more conversations. Have them with yourself first, then have them with a stranger on a bus that you'll never see again. Just completely weird them out. And then go home and talk to your partner, because you've got it out. You've worked it out, right? That throat chakra, there's nothing blocking you. It doesn't feel like needles are in your throat. And you're like, look. You have a conversation that's like, look, I have something that I'd like to share with you. It's very vulnerable. And if it's okay with you, I don't want you to judge me, but I want to bring something up. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. And then you share, okay, these are the feelings that I'm having, but of course I am concerned with you. How do you feel? Right? Because there's a lot of feelings. And then you go from there and you work it out. But then also understand that if she's not there yet, what is your choice then? Because your choice is to either stay with that or to consciously say, this is not working. It's not benefiting you. It's not benefiting me. It's on my mind all the time. I feel restrictive to myself. I don't feel like myself anymore. So what do? You uncouple, or you unthruple, or you unquadruple, or whatever, right?
I think it's time for the last question.
What do you think of poly relationships where they have an agreement of seeing other people, but only one of them ends up doing it?
So I had this question. I actually asked this question to a poly family as well, where he was going on dates and both of the women weren't. And I had a conversation with one of the ladies who's a good friend of mine, and I was like, why aren't you going on dates? Like, why aren't you going? And it was uncomfortable at that time for him. He was still working through, I guess, some of his own personal stuff. It's been about 6 months since, and now they are going on dates as well. So that's like one side of that. Like, it took some time and it took a lot of communication. You had to get to a certain place and a certain foundation before you can springboard off of that. But otherwise, if you're in a relationship and they just don't want to. So there's a book called Open, I believe. It's called Open. And I don't know if did the slides work or no? No, they're off. I had it, one of the pages was my resources, I tried to find something from every aspect or something from every part of the spectrum so that I can get a well-rounded view, and then I decide for myself. This is testy water to communicate about, I will say. But it's conversations that do need to be brought up. So in the book, she wanted more. She wanted somebody else as a partner. She wanted sexual experiences with a woman, and she was navigating. First, it was cheating, and it was infidelity. And then he became a part of that situation. Then they started dating a woman, and when the woman wanted to go on to a primary partner for herself and live monogamously, well, then he didn't want any more, but he allowed for her because that's the price he was paying to ride that ride. That was a Dan Savage quote. I don't know if anybody knows Dan Savage. I love him. He's like, you pay the price to ride that ride. That's what they need and that's what they want. If you're not gonna die, well, then that's what you do in order to stay together, right? Which brings up a little bit of that question of why should your relationship end for, he or she goes outside of the relationship and has a weekend away with the guys and comes back, oh God, I was so drunk that I took this girl home, for the night. But then the wife is so furious that now everything you've built up to that point is nothing. Like, that sounds just a crazy concept, is nothing. And so the house and the kids and all those things, right? It's kind of wild to think about that. I just think conversations need to happen to figure out what works for you, right?
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you for your talk.
You guys got me.